started out as just another job. My name's Jake, and I've been trucking cross-country for the better part of 15 years. The road is my home, my constant, and I've seen just about everything you can imagine out there. Blistering storms, deranged hitchhikers, and even a few accidents that made me question how anyone survived. But nothing prepared me for the night I rolled into Deercliff, Wyoming. I was hauling a load of medical supplies from Denver to Seattle. It wasn't an unusual route for me, and I'd taken it plenty of times before. The job was straightforward, the pay was decent, and I didn't mind the solitude. But this trip was different. Something felt off from the moment I crossed the Wyoming state line. The first sign of trouble came at a truck stop just outside of Deercliff. It was already dark, and I needed to stretch my legs and grab some coffee to power through the next leg of the drive. The place was a little more run down than I expected, but that's not uncommon out in the middle of nowhere. What struck me was how empty it was. Usually, truck stops are bustling with activity no matter the hour. Drivers refueling, grabbing a bite, or just shooting the breeze. But this one, dead silent. The cashier, an older man with a weathered face and tired eyes, seemed surprised to see me. "Not many folks pass through here this late," he said, sliding my coffee across the counter. "You'd best be careful on the road. Been some incidents lately." "What kind of incidents?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He hesitated, his gaze shifting to the window as if expecting someone to appear. "Couple of truckers went missing. Sheriff says it's wild animals, but I don't buy it. You'd do well to keep moving and not stop for anyone. You hear me?" I nodded, though his warning didn't exactly put me at ease. Missing truckers? Wild animals? It sounded like local superstition to me. Still, I thanked him, tipped my hat, and got back on the road. The stretch of highway leading out of Deercliff was eerily quiet. The only light came from my headlights cutting through the pitch-black night, and the only sound was the hum of my engine. I tried to shake off the unease gnawing at me by focusing on the road ahead, but it wasn't long before I saw something that made my stomach drop. A semi was parked on the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking weakly. As I got closer, I could see the driver's side door hanging open. Now, I've been in this business long enough to know the unwritten rule. You don't leave a fellow trucker stranded. So, against my better judgment, I slowed down and pulled over behind the rig. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out of my cab. The night air was cold and carried an unsettling stillness. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing in the emptiness. "Anyone there? Need help?" No response. I approached the truck cautiously, shining my flashlight inside. The cab was empty, but it looked like there had been a struggle. Papers were scattered across the seats, and the CB radio had been ripped out. A chill ran down my spine as I noticed a streak of what looked like blood on the steering wheel. "What the hell happened here?" I muttered to myself. That's when I heard it. A faint rustling sound coming from the nearby trees. I swung my flashlight toward the noise, my heart pounding. The beam illuminated nothing but dense foliage. "Hello," I called again, my voice trembling now. Still nothing. Every instinct screamed at me to get back in my truck and keep driving, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone might need help. I took a few cautious steps toward the trees, straining my ears for any sound. That's when I saw it. A figure darting between the trees, too fast for me to get a good look. "Hey!" I shouted, my flashlight shaking in my hand. "Stop!" No response. Just the sound of footsteps crunching through the underbrush, growing fainter until they disappeared altogether. I didn't wait around to find out who or what it was. I turned and ran back to my truck, my heart racing. As I climbed into the cab and locked the doors, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I floored it, putting as much distance as I could between me and that abandoned rig. But the night was far from over. About an hour later, my fuel gauge caught my eye. It was dropping faster than it should have been, like I had a leak or someone had tampered with the tank. I cursed under my breath and started scanning the road for the next gas station. My CB radio crackled to life, and for a moment, I felt a wave of relief. Maybe another driver was nearby. "Breaker, breaker, this is Jake. Anyone out there?" I said, grabbing the mic. Static. Then a voice, low and distorted. "You should have kept driving, Jake." My blood turned to ice. "Who is this? How do you know my name?" No response. Just static. I slammed the mic back into its holder and kept driving, my eyes darting to the rearview mirrors. My headlights illuminated a sign up ahead, "Gas station 2 miles." Relief washed over me. If I could refuel and regroup, maybe I could figure out what the hell was going on. The gas station was even more desolate than the truck stop had been. Only one pump was operational, and the building itself looked abandoned. But I didn't have a choice. I pulled up to the pump, shut off the engine, and climbed out. As I started refueling, I kept my head on a swivel, my flashlight in one hand. The air felt heavy, oppressive, like something was pressing down on me. Then I heard it again, that rustling sound, closer this time. "Who's there?" I shouted, spinning around. My flashlight beam caught movement near the edge of the station's parking lot. A man stepped into the light, his face obscured by a hood. "You lost?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer. Instead, he started walking toward me, his movements deliberate and unnerving. My hand went to the tire iron I kept in my cab, my fingers tightening around the cold steel. "Stay back," I warned, raising the tire iron. He stopped about 10 feet away, tilting his head like he was sizing me up. Then he spoke, his voice low and chilling. "You should have listened." Before I could react, he lunged at me. I swung the tire iron, connecting with his shoulder, but he barely flinched. We struggled, his strength far greater than I expected. I managed to shove him off and scrambled back into my truck, locking the doors just as he started pounding on the window. I floored it, leaving the gas pump and the man behind. My heart was racing, my hands shaking on the wheel. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, but the call wouldn't go through. No service. For the next hour, I drove like a man possessed, my eyes constantly scanning the mirrors. I didn't see him again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting. Finally, I reached a larger town and pulled into the brightly lit parking lot of a diner. I stumbled inside, breathless, and told the staff to call the police. When the sheriff arrived, I explained everything: the abandoned truck, the man at the gas station, the voice on the CB radio. They took my statement and promised to investigate, but I could tell they didn't believe me. I ended up spending the night in my truck, parked under the diner's floodlights, with the doors locked and the tire iron in my lap. A few days later, I got a call from the sheriff. They'd found the abandoned truck, but there was no sign of the driver or the man I'd encountered. They chalked it up to a drifter or a prankster, but I knew better. To this day, I don't know who he was or what he wanted. But I've never taken that route again, and I never will. Some roads aren't meant to be traveled, and some warnings aren't meant to be ignored. It started with a simple decision. My name is Josh, and I've been behind the wheel of a semi-truck for over a decade. I've seen the highways stretch endlessly under the sun, roads shimmering with heat, and I've driven through nights so dark that even the moon seemed to vanish. But nothing, not even my wildest imaginings, prepared me for the terror of Redstone Pass. I was hauling a load of building materials from Kansas City to Portland. My route was straightforward, except for a detour near the Rocky Mountains. A massive landslide had shut down a section of the interstate, forcing drivers onto a less traveled road through Redstone Pass. Most truckers hated it. The narrow roads, sharp turns, and steep cliffs weren't exactly ideal for an 18-wheeler. But I'd driven tougher routes, and I wasn't about to let a little detour slow me down. The first part of the drive through Redstone was uneventful. The road wound through dense forests, the towering pines casting long shadows under the setting sun. My CB radio crackled occasionally with chatter from other drivers, most of them complaining about the detour. I kept to myself, focusing on the road and the rhythmic hum of the engine. As night fell, the chatter on the CB died down, and an eerie silence settled over the pass. The only sound was the rumble of my truck and the occasional rustle of leaves as the wind swept through the trees. I turned on my high beams, the light cutting through the darkness ahead. That's when I saw it. A car, parked haphazardly on the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking faintly. I slowed down, pulling my truck to a stop a few yards behind the car. The hood was up, and steam billowed from the engine. A man stood nearby, waving a flashlight frantically. "Need some help," I called out, leaning out of my window. The man approached, his face partially obscured by the beam of his flashlight. He looked to be in his 40s, his clothes rumpled and his expression desperate. "Yeah, my car overheated," he said, his voice shaky. "I've been stuck here for hours. Can you give me a ride to the next town?" I hesitated. Picking up hitchhikers wasn't exactly part of the job, and I'd heard enough horror stories to know better. But the man looked genuinely distressed, and it didn't feel right to leave him stranded in the middle of nowhere. "All right," I said, unlocking the passenger door. "Hop in." He climbed into the cab, settling into the seat with a sigh of relief. "Thanks, man. I don't know what I'd have done if you hadn't come along." "No problem," I replied, pulling back onto the road. "What's your name?" "Tom," he said. The drive continued in silence for a while. Tom seemed nervous, his eyes darting to the mirrors and the road behind us. "You all right?" I asked, glancing at him. "Yeah, just rough day," he muttered. I let it go, focusing on navigating the winding road. But the tension in the cab was palpable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. About 20 minutes later, my headlights caught movement ahead. A figure was standing in the middle of the road, waving their arms. I slowed down, squinting to get a better look. It was a woman, her face pale and her clothes torn. "What the hell?" I muttered, bringing the truck to a stop. Tom's hand shot out, grabbing my arm. "Don't stop," he said urgently. "What are you talking about?" "She needs help," I said, already reaching for the door handle. "No," he insisted, his grip tightening. "It's a trap." Before I could respond, the woman screamed, a blood-curdling sound that sent shivers down my spine. She stumbled toward the truck, her eyes wide with terror. "Please, help me," she cried, banging on the driver's side door. I hesitated, torn between helping her and listening to Tom. Then I saw them, shadows emerging from the trees on either side of the road. Men, at least half a dozen of them, all armed with bats and crowbars. "Drive!" Tom shouted. I didn't need to be told twice. I slammed my foot on the gas, the truck lurching forward. The woman leapt out of the way just in time, and the men scattered as I barreled through. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. "They're bandits," Tom said, his voice trembling. "They set up fake breakdowns to lure in drivers, then rob them. Or worse." "How do you know that?" I asked, suspicion creeping into my voice. Tom hesitated, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "Because I've seen it before. They got my brother last year. He didn't make it." His explanation made sense, but something about his demeanor still didn't sit right with me. I decided to keep my questions to myself for the time being. The rest of the drive through Redstone Pass was a blur of adrenaline and paranoia. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves, felt like a potential threat. When we finally reached the next town, a small place called Pine Hollow, I pulled into the parking lot of a brightly lit diner. "This is where I'm stopping," I said, turning to Tom. "You can get help here." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Thanks for the ride," he said, climbing out of the cab. I watched as he disappeared into the diner, then leaned back in my seat with a sigh of relief. But my respite was short-lived. As I stepped out of the truck to stretch my legs, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. I spun around, my heart racing, to find myself face to face with a man in a sheriff's uniform. "You Jake?" he asked, his tone gruff. "Yeah," I replied warily. "What's this about?" "We need to talk," he said. "About your passenger." My stomach dropped. "What about him?" The sheriff's expression hardened. "Tom isn't who you think he is. He's part of that gang you ran into. They use people like him to gain drivers' trust, then lead them into traps." I felt the blood drain from my face. But he said they killed his brother. The sheriff shook his head. That's the story he tells everyone. You're lucky you got out when you did. I glanced toward the diner, my pulse pounding. He's in there right now. The sheriff nodded. And we're going to take care of it. Stay here. I watched as the sheriff and his deputies entered the diner, their hands on their holstered guns. Moments later, they emerged with Tom in handcuffs. His expression was calm, almost smug, as they led him to a squad car. Thanks for the ride, Jake, he called out, a sinister smile spreading across his face. I didn't respond, my mind racing. I'd narrowly escaped a trap, but the encounter left me shaken. To this day, I'm more cautious about who I let into my truck. The open road may be my home, but it's not always safe, and some dangers are all too human. It began with a simple phone call. My name is Eric, and I've been hauling freight for close to 15 years. I know the highways better than most people know their own neighborhoods. I've crossed deserts under scorching heat, braved icy mountain passes, and witnessed countless sunrises from behind the wheel. But nothing prepared me for what I encountered on Nightshade Road. I was on a tight schedule, transporting medical equipment from Denver to Salt Lake City. The delivery was urgent, so when my dispatcher called to inform me about an accident blocking the main interstate, I didn't think twice about taking the suggested detour. The alternate route cut through a remote area, a lonely stretch of road surrounded by miles of dense forest. The first few hours were uneventful. The scenery was beautiful, the setting sun casting golden light on the trees. I tuned into some late-night radio shows to keep myself entertained. Most of the stations crackled with static, but one had a local talk show discussing urban legends. They mentioned Nightshade Road, describing it as a place to avoid at all costs. Travelers disappear, the host said in a hushed tone. Some say it's bandits. Others blame something darker. I chuckled at the dramatics. As a trucker, I'd heard it all before. Ghost stories and conspiracy theories meant to scare rookies. I turned the dial, finding a station playing classic rock, and pressed on. As night fell, the road narrowed. My headlights illuminated the dense forest pressing in on both sides. The occasional deer darted out, their eyes glowing like tiny lanterns. The road felt eerily abandoned. I hadn't seen another vehicle in over an hour. Then, up ahead, I noticed something unusual. A motorcycle lying on its side, its rear wheel still spinning. I slowed down, scanning the area. The bike was old but in decent shape, and there was no sign of its rider. My instinct told me to keep driving, but something about the scene didn't sit right. What if someone was hurt? Pulling over, I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out of the cab. The air was cool, and the forest was silent except for the faint chirping of crickets. As I approached the motorcycle, I noticed blood on the ground. A lot of it. My pulse quickened. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing. "Is anyone there?" A rustling sound came from the trees to my right. I swung the flashlight beam in that direction, but saw nothing. Suddenly, a man stumbled out of the woods, clutching his side. His clothes were torn, and his face was streaked with blood. "Help me," he gasped, collapsing to his knees. I rushed to his side, supporting him as he struggled to stay upright. "What happened?" I asked, scanning the darkness around us. They're after me," he whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "We have to go. Now." "Who's after you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he gripped my arm with surprising strength and tried to pull me toward my truck. "Please, they'll kill us both." Every instinct told me to leave him behind. This whole situation screamed trouble, but I couldn't just abandon him. I helped him into the passenger seat and climbed back into the cab. As I started the engine, I noticed movement in the rearview mirror, shadows darting across the road behind us. "Drive!" the man shouted, his voice hoarse. I slammed my foot on the gas, the truck roaring to life. The shadows disappeared into the darkness as we sped down the road. My hands gripped the wheel tightly, adrenaline coursing through me. What the hell is going on? I demanded, glancing at him. He was shaking, clutching his side where blood seeped through his fingers. They set traps, pretend to break down, then ambush anyone who stops. I got away, but they don't let witnesses live. His words sent a chill down my spine. Bandits. I'd heard rumors of such things in remote areas, but I never thought I'd encounter it myself. Do you know how many there are? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Too many, he said. They'll have a vehicle. They always do. As if on cue, headlights appeared in the distance behind us, rapidly closing in. The man cursed under his breath. That's them. I pushed the truck harder, the engine growling as we took a sharp turn. The headlights followed, unrelenting. My heart pounded as the road twisted and turned, the weight of the trailer making each corner a gamble. Suddenly, a loud pop echoed through the cab, followed by a sickening thud. I fought to control the truck as the trailer swayed violently. "They're shooting at the tires," I shouted. The man leaned forward, his face pale. "We won't outrun them. We need to hide." "There's nowhere to hide," I snapped, gesturing to the dense forest. "This thing isn't exactly built for off-roading." "Trust me," he said, his voice firm. "There's an old logging road about a mile ahead. Turn there." Reluctantly, I followed his instructions, scanning the darkness for the turnoff. The headlights behind us grew closer, their beams bouncing erratically as the vehicle gained on us. Then I saw it, a narrow dirt path veering off to the right. I yanked the wheel, the truck lurching as we left the pavement. The trailer rattled and groaned as we bounced over the uneven terrain. Branches scraped against the cab, and the headlights behind us disappeared, blocked by the dense trees. "Kill the lights," the man said urgently. "They'll follow the tracks." I hesitated, then switched off the headlights. The darkness was absolute. The only sounds the truck's rumbling engine and the distant roar of the pursuing vehicle. I guided the truck as carefully as I could, relying on the faint glow of the moon filtering through the trees. After what felt like an eternity, the man tapped my arm. "Stop here." I brought the truck to a halt, cutting the engine. Silence enveloped us, broken only by our labored breathing. The man peered out the window, his body tense. "They'll search," he said quietly. "We need to be ready." "Ready for what?" I asked, my voice low. "I'm a trucker, not a soldier." He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small handgun. "Just stay quiet and follow my lead." The minutes dragged on, each one stretching into an eternity. Then, faintly, I heard it, the crunch of tires on gravel. The bastards were close. The man signaled for me to stay down as he cracked the door open and slipped out into the shadows. I stayed in the cab, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give us away. Through the windshield, I saw the faint glow of headlights moving slowly through the forest. Suddenly, a gunshot shattered the silence. I ducked instinctively, my hands gripping the edge of the seat. More shots followed, the sharp cracks echoing through the trees. Then silence. I waited, my breath caught in my throat. Finally, the passenger door opened, and the man climbed back in. His face was grim, and his hands were shaking. "Are they?" I began, but he cut me off. "Let's go," he said. "Now." I didn't argue. I started the engine and carefully navigated back to the main road. The rest of the drive was a blur. When we finally reached the outskirts of Salt Lake City, the man asked me to drop him off at a truck stop. He thanked me, then disappeared into the night. To this day, I don't know who he was or what happened to the people chasing us, but I've avoided Nightshade Road ever since. Some risks just aren't worth taking, no matter how urgent the delivery. Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying the content. As a college student, I work hard to create these videos, and I edit everything on my mobile phone. I'm hoping to upgrade to a laptop to improve the quality of my videos, but I don't want to ask for money directly. This Christmas, if you enjoy what I do, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could consider subscribing to the channel. It would mean the world to me. Your support helps me so much as I continue working toward my goals. Wishing you all a very Merry Christmas. May this festive season bring you joy and warmth. Thanks again for your support, and stay tuned for more.